My name is Fiona Carlisle. I am 32 years old, founder and CEO of Fortify Legal Tech, a company that went public this very morning after years of building it from nothing but stubborn will and too many late nights. Yet right now, I am simply another graduate in a sea of black gowns and square caps, waiting for my turn to walk across the stage under the relentless May sun. The air carries the faint sweetness of cut grass from the football field, mixed with the sharp scent of hot asphalt from the parking lot. My palms are slightly damp, not from nerves about receiving the diploma, but because of the weight of what this day holds. The line in front of me moves forward. I keep my gaze on the stage until I feel a faint vibration in the inner pocket of my gown. My instinct is to ignore it. Phones and ceremonies do not mix, but curiosity edges in. I slide my hand into the pocket, just enough to glance at the screen. 8 words. Cold, clipped, each one a blade. Don't expect support. You're on your own. It is from my mother. The timing is no accident. She has always known exactly when to strike the match that leaves a room colder than before. I imagine her thumb pressing send while I stood somewhere in this line, unaware that she had just folded this moment in half with her familiar disapproval. The applause and chatter around me dull to something distant. My breath sounds louder in my own ears. The heat from the sun seems heavier, pressing down through the black fabric of my gown. Before the message can fully settle, the phone vibrates again. This time, Evelyn's name lights the screen. I swipe to answer, her voice tumbling out fast, bright with adrenaline. We opened at $88 a share. Market cap just crossed $2.5 billion. It's blowing up everywhere. Feeds, tickers, push notifications. CNBC and Bloomberg want you on air today. Her words hit like wind, filling the sails of a ship that's been ready to launch for years. The contrast between the two messages is almost dizzying. One slamming a familiar door shut, the other flinging open a set of double gates to a horizon I once thought out of reach. The marshal in the black robe waves me forward. The stage looms ahead, sunlight glinting off the polished wood steps. My phone is back in my pocket now, but I feel its weight, the dual messages like twin anchors, one tethered to the past, the other to the future. I walk up the steps and into the light. The audience blurs, a patchwork of colors and faces. My eyes sweep instinctively toward the family section. There she is, my mother. Perfect posture, hair catching the sun in carefully arranged waves. Beside her, my brother leans in, his phone angled toward her. She takes it, glances at the screen, and I watch her face still. I cannot read the words from here, but I don't need to. The headlines are everywhere now. She is seeing them for herself. My company's name in bold, the market cap, number that cannot be softened or spun away. Her breath pauses, just long enough for me to notice, and when she lifts her chin again, the air between us changes. It is not pride. It is recognition, reluctant and sharp, a recalibration of the narrative she has carried about me for years. The dean's hand extends. I take the diploma, its parchment thick and warm from his palm. A camera flash pops from somewhere off to the side, catching the moment for whoever wants to keep it. The applause swells, but my focus is split between the paper in my hand and the 2 messages in my pocket. I descend the far steps, the sound of my shoes against the wood clear and even. Each step feels like an unspoken goodbye to a version of myself defined by someone else's limits. It begins as a ripple. 2 graduates in the row ahead of me lean toward each other, whispering while glancing at their phones. In the parents section, a man in a navy blazer nudges the woman beside him, holding out his screen. She squints, her brows lifting in surprise. The murmurs spread outward like concentric circles from a stone dropped into water. A couple of faculty members pass a phone down their row, heads bending, eyes flicking toward the seating area, where I've just returned. Key words float in the air, carried between fragments of conversation. IPO, $2.5 billion. Youngest CEO. Camera phones rise, angling toward me instead of the stage. I settle onto the wooden bench, the smooth surface cool through the layers of my gown. My tassel sways against my cheek when I turn my head. Across the crowd, my mother sits almost perfectly still. Her hands are in her lap now, her phone set aside. My brother leans toward her, lips moving, but she does not reply. The master of ceremonies calls the next name. Polite applause follows. But in my corner of the ceremony, there is a different rhythm, a subtle tightening of focus. It's as if invisible threads are drawing attention toward me without anyone speaking my name. Then, without warning, memory pulls me backward. I am 12 years old in our kitchen, the winter air seeping through the poorly sealed window. I'm wearing a sweater too thin for January and holding the torn coat I've outgrown. I need $40 for a new one, I say, the words careful but steady. Without looking up from her ledger, my mother replies, "Just wear another sweater under it." Winter's almost over. On the floor beside her chair sits a glossy shopping bag. Inside, a brand new leather purse she bought for herself only days before. The click of a nearby camera pulls me back to the present. A photographer in the aisle frames his shot carefully, the lens steady on me. Somewhere behind him, a fresh wave of murmurs spreads. Someone has just read the news and shared it aloud. I let my gaze meet my mother's. She looks back, her expression an unreadable blend of control and calculation. There is no visible pride, no smile of congratulations, but there is something else. Acknowledgement. It is quiet, reluctant, but undeniable. The program on stage rolls forward, each graduate's name punctuated by claps and cheers. In my section, the sound feels muffled, the air heavier, as if the moment has drawn a small, invisible boundary around us. Another camera flash. I lift my chin slightly, not for vanity, but for the sake of the record. Some moments need no caption to tell their story. I was born into a house where money was never just money. It was a measurement of loyalty, a currency of control, and a silent tool for shaping who held power and who did not. My father, Harold Carlisle, carried himself with the authority of a man who believed he was always right. My mother, Marlene, had the precision of someone who never forgot a slight, no matter how small. And my older brother Daniel had been groomed from the start to inherit not only my father's business instincts, but also the privileges that came with unquestioned trust. In our family, there was an unspoken law: money flowed only to the people considered responsible. That word, in my parents' vocabulary, was interchangeable with male or compliant. Daniel fit the mold effortlessly. I did not. From as far back as I can remember, I was expected to hand over any earnings I made. Babysitting money at 14, the tips from waiting tables at 16, the paycheck from my summer internship at a law office. Each time, the ritual was the same. My mother would be sitting at the dining table, the ledger open in front of her. She always used the same black fountain pen, its gold nib glinting under the warm light of the chandelier. "Let me see it," she would say, holding out her hand without looking up from her writing. I would place the envelope or folded bills on the table. She would smooth them flat with her fingertips, count them silently, then write the total in her perfect looping script. "It goes into the family fund," she would explain, as if this were a noble duty I should feel honored to fulfill. "We're all in this together." But the family fund was a locked drawer in my parents' study, the contents of which I never once saw. It wasn't a savings account in my name, not even a shared household account. It was a private reserve that only my parents controlled. Daniel never contributed a cent from his part-time landscaping job in high school. If anything, the fund seemed to work in reverse for him. Whenever he wanted gas money, new sports equipment, or the latest phone, it appeared instantly in his hands. No questions asked. I learned quickly that in our house, transparency was selective. My father spoke often about the importance of responsibility and planning for the future, but those principles applied only when they reinforced his authority. My mother enforced the rules with quiet precision, ensuring the lines were never crossed, at least not by me. I remember one afternoon in my final year of high school, I had just been paid for a small legal research project I'd done for a retired attorney in town. It was more money than I'd ever earned in a single week. I came home with the envelope in my bag, already imagining the small laptop I could finally buy for college applications. When I handed it over, my mother didn't even glance at me. She counted the bills, recorded the figure in the ledger, and slipped the envelope into a folder labeled Household Operations. "I'll need to buy my own laptop for school," I said cautiously. "We'll see what's possible," she replied, which in her language meant no. The following week, I saw Daniel at the kitchen counter with a brand new tablet, top of the line, paid for, according to him, from the family budget. These patterns built something in me, quietly and steadily. They taught me not just about inequality, but about the mechanisms that sustain it. My father's lectures, my mother's ledger, the closed-door conversations in the study, they were all part of a system designed to centralize control. But they also, without realizing it, trained me. I began to keep my own records. At first, they were just notes in a small spiral notebook, dates, amounts, the source of the money, and when I handed it over. Later, I added details about what the money was supposedly used for, pieced together from overheard remarks or receipts left on the counter. I didn't yet know why I was doing it. I only knew it felt necessary, like keeping a map in case I ever needed to find my way out. Over time, the notebook became something more, a personal archive, a ledger that mirrored my mother's but told a very different story. It held proof of the imbalance, page after page of transactions that flowed one way. By the time I left for college, that notebook had grown thick. I kept it hidden in a box under my bed, wrapped in an old t-shirt. I never spoke of it, not to friends, not even to the kind professors who encouraged me to study law. But it was there, a silent inventory of debts that could never be repaid in dollars. I didn't know then that one day those pages would matter, that they would be more than a record of unfairness. They would be the first bricks in a wall I would build to protect myself, or that they would become the seeds of a strategy that would, years later, turn the same system my parents used against me into the very thing that would free me. In our house, money was power, and I was beginning to understand that knowledge, documented, undeniable knowledge, was power too. By my second year of college, I thought I had finally built some distance from my parents' reach. I was balancing classes, a part-time job at the campus law library, and just enough financial aid to cover the essentials. I didn't expect surprises, at least not the kind that could shatter the fragile independence I'd worked so hard to building. It was late February when I stopped by the student finance office to straighten out a small error on my tuition statement. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and a brisk tone, typed my name into her system and frowned slightly. "Fiona, I'm going to need to verify something," she said, scrolling through a page I couldn't see. "It looks like there's a private loan in your name. 2, actually. The total balance is just over $120,000. The words didn't register at first. "That can't be right," I said, my voice flat. "I've never taken a private loan. All my aid is federal and need-based." She turned the screen toward me. My name, my social security number, my home address from 2 years ago, all tied to a pair of signatures on digital loan agreements. I knew that address. I knew that was the exact period when I was still living under my parents' roof. My signature was there too. In looping black script, I didn't remember writing. The ride home that weekend felt longer than usual. I replayed the conversation in my head, my mind racing with the possibilities. Identity theft, a clerical error, something worse. When I walked into the house, the smell of roast chicken drifted from the kitchen, warm and familiar, but my chest was tight. I found my mother in the dining room, her ledger open as always. She was writing with that same black fountain pen, the one I'd watched her use all through my childhood. "I found something," I began, keeping my tone even. "A loan in my name. Actually, 2 loans, over $100,000. She didn't look startled. If anything, she looked faintly impatient, as though I'd interrupted her mid-task. "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand lightly. "We needed a little extra to cover some family expenses. You were over 18, so it made sense to use your name. It's not like you were using your credit for anything important." My jaw tightened. "Family expenses, that's 6 figures. She glanced toward the window where the afternoon light caught the metallic paint of a new SUV in the driveway. a model less than a month old. "It's transportation," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "And there were other needs. You'll benefit in the long run." Her words were smooth, but they landed like ice in my stomach. The casualness of it, the way she folded my financial future into her definition of necessity, made the room feel colder. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I asked, "Do you have the paperwork?" She arched a brow. "Why?" "So I can keep track, in case there's anything I need to file with my own records." She seemed to weigh the question for a moment, then slid a thin stack of printed pages across the table. I picked them up, flipping through the loan agreements, payment schedules, and bank confirmations. The signatures stared back at me. Mine, but not mine. I thanked her, careful to keep my tone neutral, and carried the papers upstairs. Once in my old room, I closed the door and slid the documents into a large manila envelope. I added it to a box in my closet where, over the years, I had quietly stored other records. Photocopies of my mother's ledger entries when she left it unattended, receipts that didn't match the stories I was told, bank statements that arrived in unsealed envelopes. That evening, while the house was quiet, I opened the box and began cataloging everything. I numbered each item, wrote down the date and the source, and made brief notes in a separate spiral notebook. It wasn't anger driving me, at least not yet. It was something colder, more deliberate. This was my first real reserve, though I didn't call it that then. It was just a habit, born from years of watching money vanish into locked drawers and private accounts. But as I stacked the documents neatly, I realized I was doing more than collecting scraps of paper. I was building a timeline, a chain of evidence. I didn't know exactly how or when I would use it. All I knew was that I would never again allow someone else to decide what my future was worth, and that someday the same pages my mother handed me without a second thought might become the most valuable thing I owned. That night, I slid the box back into its place at the bottom of the closet under an old quilt. Outside, the SUV's chrome trim caught the porch light gleaming. Inside, my quiet archive grew heavier. And for the first time, I understood that survival in my family wasn't just about enduring. It was about recording everything they hoped I wouldn't remember. By my third year of college, I had landed a coveted internship at a boutique M&A law firm in the city. It was the kind of place where the glass walls gleamed, the coffee was stronger than the interns, and conversations about billion-dollar deals happened in the same casual tone most people used to discuss the weather. I was there to learn about corporate structures and due diligence, but I ended up learning something far more valuable. That summer, my assigned supervisor was Harper Vale, a senior partner with a reputation for being both brilliant and unflinching. She was in her late 40s, tall and sharp-featured, with hair the color of polished steel, and a gaze that seemed to measure every word you said before deciding whether it deserved a response. The other interns found her intimidating. I found her magnetic. Harper had a past the partners didn't talk about openly, but in the quiet moments between case prep and conference calls, she would let pieces of it slip. One evening, while we were sorting through acquisition contracts in the firm's small war room, I noticed her looking at a file with a kind of detached calm. I asked about it, expecting a legal anecdote. Instead, she told me something personal. "I once trusted my family with my assets," she said, her voice low, but steady. "Not just money, shares, property titles, intellectual property. I believed that blood would protect what I'd built." She paused, flipping a page in the file. "I was wrong. They stripped it all. I fought to get some of it back, but the damage was done." I didn't speak right away. Her tone wasn't bitter. It was honed, like steel after it's been through fire. "How did you recover?" I asked finally. Her eyes met mine, sharp and deliberate. "By waiting. You don't strike when you're hurt. You strike when you're ready, and by then, you make sure the blow is so precise, there's no recovery for them." The words sank into me, each one finding a place alongside the quiet archive I had been building for years. Another time, over lunch at a cafe across the street from the firm, Harper shared the second lesson. We had just wrapped a tense negotiation where our client had agreed to a deal on our terms. No concessions. The opposing counsel had left with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "People think justice is loud," she said, stirring her tea. "Courtrooms, headlines, grand speeches, but the most lasting justice is quiet. It's a contract signed without fanfare that changes who holds the power. It's an agreement they can't undo because they didn't see it coming. Silent justice. That's what echoes the longest." I thought about my mother's ledger, the loans in my name, the years of watching my contributions vanish into a locked drawer, and I understood that what Harper was talking about wasn't just law, it was strategy. Over the weeks, she began to involve me in more than just filing and summarizing. She had me review merger documents, trace shareholder patterns, and flag discrepancies in acquisition targets' records. It was meticulous work, the kind that trained your eye to see not just what was written, but what was missing. "Details," she would say, tapping the edge of a page with her pen. "People trip over them when they're in a hurry. Learn to step over them and you'll always be ahead." By the end of the summer, Harper had given me something I didn't even know I'd been searching for. A framework. The notebook I kept in secret was no longer just a record. It was potential leverage. The documents I stored weren't just memories of unfairness. They were the foundations of a case that hadn't yet been built. On my last day, she handed me a slim leather-bound planner. Inside, on the first page, she'd written in her clean, slanted hand, "Patience is a weapon. Precision is the strike, and silence is the victory they never see coming." I closed the planner carefully, feeling the weight of her words settle into the same place where my mother's and father's lessons had once lived. But now, they had been rewritten. Harper didn't know the details of my family history, and I didn't offer them. But she had given me the language, the discipline, and the perspective I would need when the time came to act. As I left the firm that day, the city was washed in late summer light, the air carrying the faint scent of rain from an earlier storm. I slipped the planner into my bag, right next to the envelope of documents I had brought from my dorm to review during lunch breaks. They were part of the same plan now, even if the plan was still unnamed. It would take years before the pieces aligned, before I could use everything I'd learned to turn the story around. But thanks to Harper Vale, I now knew two truths that would shape everything that followed. Never strike before you're ready. And when you do, let the echo of your silence carry farther than any shout ever could. By the time I was 26, I had everything I thought I was supposed to want. Steady work at a respected M&A law firm, a salary that paid the rent without panic, and a predictable career ladder I could climb one rung at a time. On paper, it was safe. But every morning when I looked at the stack of contracts on my desk, I felt the same hollowness I used to feel sitting at my parents' dining table, watching my earnings vanish into their family fund. The work was transactional. It wasn't that I disliked the law. I loved the structure of it, the way it could be both a shield and a sword. But most of our clients were already powerful. We were just helping them shift pieces around the board. The smaller players, the kind of businesses that kept communities alive, were almost always on the losing side of those deals. I knew what it was like to be on that side. And the longer I stayed, the more certain I became that I didn't want to spend my life defending the already defended. One evening, after a 14-hour day ending in a last-minute contract review, I found myself walking past Harper's office. She was on the phone, her tone clipped but calm, and I caught the words client protection and predatory clause. When she hung up, she glanced at me. "You look like you're carrying something," she said. I stepped inside and closed the door. "I can't stop thinking about the people who can't afford us," I admitted. "The small business owners, the startups. Every time I see one get crushed in a deal, I think about what I could do for them if I wasn't here." Harper leaned back, studying me. "You're not wrong, but helping them from here isn't possible. Not in the way you're imagining." I hesitated. "Then maybe I shouldn't be here at all." Her brow lifted slightly, the faintest sign of approval. If you're serious, you'll need more than an idea. You'll need capital, infrastructure, and the right people, and you'll need to remember what I told you. Don't make a move until you're ready to strike. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. drafting a plan. It wasn't just a law practice, it was a platform. I called it Fortify Legal Tech, a hybrid between a legal consultancy and a technology tool that could help small and mid-sized businesses identify and close vulnerabilities before they became disasters. The model was simple: subscription-based access to vetted legal templates, automated contract scanning for predatory clauses, and a network of on-call attorneys willing to provide flat-rate services for urgent matters. But the mission was deeply personal: protect people from the same kinds of traps my parents had walked me into without my consent. I liquidated nearly all of my savings, money I had been hoarding since college in case my family pulled another stunt, and put it toward the initial build. When Harper saw the plan, she didn't hesitate. "I'll invest," she said, "but my stake is advisory. I don't want control. This is yours." Her confidence was like oxygen. With her seed investment and my own funds, I was able to hire a small development team to build the platform. The first few months were brutal. Early mornings spent drafting user flows, afternoons chasing down beta testers, nights poring over code feedback I barely understood. I lived on takeout and cold coffee, wearing the same 3 blazers on rotation for every pitch meeting. That's when Evelyn entered the picture. She'd been a senior financial analyst for a mid-tier venture capital firm, but she was looking for something more hands-on. A mutual contact introduced us, saying, "She understands money the way Harper understands law." From our first meeting, I knew she was the missing piece. Evelyn had a way of breaking down complex financial models into language any founder could understand. She also had an instinct for spotting structural weaknesses, not just in businesses, but in people. She didn't flinch when I told her my history, and she didn't offer pity. Instead, she said, "So you know exactly what we're protecting them from." We became partners within weeks. She took the title of CFO, but her role was far more than that. She was the strategist who balanced my legal vision with financial reality. Together, we mapped out a sustainable growth plan, starting with targeted outreach to industries most vulnerable to exploitative contracts: independent manufacturing, local logistics companies, and family-run service providers. We launched quietly, with no grand PR campaign, just a handful of pilot clients and a promise: we will make sure no one takes from you what you've built. In those early days, I worked harder than I ever had at the firm, but it was different. Every late night felt purposeful. Every new client felt like a small victory in a personal war. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about my parents, not with the raw anger I once felt, but with a cool, measured certainty. Fortify wasn't just for the businesses I served. It was the foundation for something bigger. It was the shield I was building for others, and eventually, the weapon would use for myself. By my mid-20s, the career ladder in front of me was neat, predictable, and completely uninspiring. I was on track to make senior associate at the M&A firm within 2 years, maybe partner within a decade if I played the politics right. The office was sleek, the clients high profile, the cases complex, but the victories were hollow. Every deal we closed felt like tightening a vice around the smaller party, the one with less leverage and fewer lawyers. It wasn't theoretical for me. I had lived on the losing side of power before, and I could still remember the sting of watching resources disappear because someone else controlled the terms. No matter how polished the boardroom table was, I could see the same dynamic playing out in front of me: predatory clauses, quiet exploitation, legal traps dressed as opportunities. One evening, Harper called me into her office. She was reviewing a merger agreement, her reading glasses low on her nose, a half-empty mug of tea at her elbow. Without looking up, she said, "You've been distracted lately." "I've been thinking," I admitted, "about the people who don't have someone like us in their corner. They sign contracts they don't understand, and by the time they realize what's been taken, it's too late." Harper closed the file, giving me her full attention. "And you think you can fix that from inside this firm?" I shook my head. "Not here. not with the way this place runs." She didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. "Then you already know the answer. You have to step out. Build it yourself. But don't confuse movement with readiness. You only strike when the ground is stable under your feet." Her words stayed with me long after I left her office. That night, I pulled out one of the plain black notebooks I'd been keeping for years, half legal research, half personal history. On the first blank page, I wrote 3 questions. What do they need? How can I give it to them? How do I keep it safe? The answers came faster than I expected. They needed access, affordable, practical, and proactive. They needed tools that could catch a trap before it snapped shut. And they needed a structure that wasn't built to drain them dry. The concept began to take shape, a hybrid of legal consultancy and technology focused entirely on protecting small and mid-sized businesses from the kind of contractual exploitation that had once gutted my own autonomy. I named it Fortify Legal Tech because the goal wasn't just defense, it was strengthening from within. I ran the numbers. Between my savings and liquid assets, I could cover the basic legal formation, minimal tech development, and initial operating costs for a short runway. But it would be dangerously tight. That's when I brought the plan to Harper. She read it without interruption, her eyes moving quickly but deliberately over each page. When she finished, she set it down and leaned back. "It's ambitious, risky, and exactly the kind of thing you're meant to do. I'm asking you to invest," I said, my voice steady. "I will," she replied without hesitation. "But only as an advisor. No ownership, no control. This is your fight." Her confidence hit harder than I expected. It wasn't approval. It was belief. The next day, I drafted my resignation letter. I didn't circulate it for signatures. I walked it straight to the managing partner's office. His reaction was a mix of surprise and disbelief. "You're walking away from a sure thing," he said, as if the comfort of a predetermined future should be enough to keep me. "I'm walking toward the thing I came here to learn how to build," I told him. When I stepped out of that office for the last time, my arms were light, even though my future was suddenly heavier with uncertainty. The skyline looked different that day, less like a cage, more like a map I hadn't finished drawing. I took the first seed investment from Harper and opened a new business account in Fortify Legal Tech's name. The incorporation papers arrived a week later. Holding them in my hands felt nothing like receiving a promotion or a bonus. This was mine from inception to execution. I didn't know yet what obstacles would come, but for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to survive inside someone else's system. I was designing my own. And somewhere beneath the thrill of it all, a quieter thought pulsed like a second heartbeat. The stronger Fortify became, the closer I'd be to settling a much older score. The ink on Fortify Legal Tech's incorporation papers was barely dry when I signed the lease for our first office. Calling it an office was generous. It was a narrow, second-floor space above a discount furniture store, wedged between a payday loan outlet and a laundromat. The carpet was stained, the paint was uneven, and the windows rattled when buses passed on the street below. But it was cheap, and it was ours. The furniture came from thrift shops and curbside pickups. My desk was a scarred oak table missing one corner. The chairs didn't match. We had one secondhand desktop computer that overheated if you pushed it too hard, and 2 refurbished laptops that froze whenever the Wi-Fi hiccuped. On the wall, I taped a sheet of printer paper with our mission written in black marker: protect the builders, arm the dreamers, close the traps. Our first contracts were small, local, and oddly specific. An independent bakery negotiating with a supplier, a 2-man plumbing company trying to protect itself from a lopsided subcontractor agreement. These weren't glamorous cases, but they were exactly who I wanted to serve. The problem was these clients couldn't afford to wait, and they expected answers yesterday. I remember one Tuesday night when the rain pounded so hard it blurred the streetlights. My 2 junior hires, bright kids, straight out of paralegal programs, were slumped over their keyboards, eyes red from staring at the screen. We were trying to untangle a service contract that was written like a maze, full of traps designed to bleed the client dry. We worked past midnight, fueled by gas station coffee and cheap instant noodles we made in the back room with a plug-in kettle. The smell of artificial chicken broth clung to the air. I ate mine standing up, leaning over a pile of draft contracts, red pen in hand. By 2 a.m, we'd found the hidden clauses, buried 3 pages deep in the appendix, that gave the supplier the right to raise prices without notice. I drafted the counterterms, my handwriting jagged from exhaustion, and emailed them to the client before I even took off my coat. That was the rhythm of those first months. Wake up, rush to the office, put out whatever fire was already burning, hunt for more business, and collapse sometime after midnight. There were no weekends, just slightly slower days when clients were too busy to call. Cash flow was a constant shadow. Even with Harper's seed investment, rent, utilities, and the modest salaries I paid my team ate through the account fast. Every invoice sent was a small prayer that the client would pay on time. Every delay meant I had to shuffle expenses like a magician hiding a trick. One afternoon, the landlord came by, knocking on the door with the back of his knuckles. He glanced around the office with the wary expression of someone deciding if his tenant was going to last. I promised him the next check would clear without issue. It did, but only because I'd gone without my own paycheck that month. We learned to stretch every resource. Printer ink was rationed. Coffee was brewed twice with the same grounds. I clipped coupons for office supplies and scavenged for free legal resources that could supplement our own templates. Every dollar saved was a dollar that kept the lights on another day. Yet, in the middle of all that scarcity, there were moments that felt like pure abundance. When a bakery owner sent us a box of pastries as thanks for saving her from a disastrous contract. When a small construction company's owner brought his teenage son to meet us, saying we'd kept their family business alive. Those were the paydays that mattered. Late one Friday night, after my team had gone home, I stayed behind to review a particularly complex vendor dispute. Outside, the city was quiet except for the occasional hiss of passing tires on wet asphalt. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the scuffed ceiling tiles, and realized something. I was exhausted, underpaid, and carrying the weight of every decision on my shoulders, and I had never felt more certain that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The office was dim except for the desk lamp, its yellow light pooling over the contract in front of me. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Another inquiry from a small business I'd never heard of, in a town I'd never visited. The subject line read simply, "We heard you help people like us?" I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. People like us. That was the point. That was the whole reason Fortify existed. What I didn't know then was that within weeks, a new hire would walk through that battered office door, someone whose precision, loyalty, and nerve would become as integral to Fortify's survival as my own. Her name was Evelyn, and she would arrive just in time for our first real storm. The first time I saw Evelyn Cho, she was standing at the edge of a crowded finance seminar, her arms loosely crossed, eyes scanning the room as if she could calculate the profit margins of every person there. It was late winter, the kind of day when the air bit through your coat, but inside the downtown conference hall it was overheated and humming with small talk. I wasn't there for networking. I was there to learn. The session was on capital efficiency for early-stage companies, something I knew we were struggling with at Fortify Legal Tech. We had survived the leanest months, but survival wasn't growth, and our bank balance hovered in that anxious zone where one late payment from a client could set off a chain reaction. The presenter, a veteran CFO, clicked through slides about burn rates and revenue cycles. I was scribbling notes when I felt someone take the seat next to me. Evelyn didn't introduce herself immediately. She just glanced at my notebook and said, "You're tracking the wrong ratios." I looked up, startled. She gestured to my notes with the end of her pen. "You're measuring expense cuts, that's reactive. What you should be measuring is cash conversion. How fast your contracts turn into actual money in your account. That's your lifeline." It was a bold thing to say to a stranger, but there was no arrogance in her tone, just certainty. I asked her what she did. "Fractional CFO," she said simply. "I work with startups that have a product people want but can't get their money fast enough to survive. And judging by your notes, You're one of them." Something about her directness disarmed me. I admitted that yes, Fortify had paying clients, but the time lag between delivering work and collecting payment was eating into every margin we had. She pulled a notebook from her bag, flipped it open, and began sketching a simple diagram. Contracts on one side, collections on the other, a bottleneck in between. "This," she said, tapping the bottleneck, "is where companies die. Not because they don't have demand, but because their cash is trapped in motion. You fix this, you stop chasing the next client just to pay for the last one." The seminar moved on without us. By the time the session ended, I had half a page of actionable ideas and the beginnings of something I hadn't expected: trust. Evelyn didn't try to sell herself. She didn't dangle flashy projections or vague promises. She just laid out the math and showed me where we were bleeding time. We walked out together into the brittle afternoon air. She asked a few pointed questions about our client base, payment terms, and cost structure. When I hesitated to share specifics, she just smiled. "You don't have to tell me now, but if you want to get ahead of your own invoices, you're going to need someone who thinks in weeks, not months." I didn't respond right away. Back at the office that night, I kept hearing her voice in my head. Weeks, not months. It wasn't a sales pitch, it was a challenge. 2 days later, I emailed her, inviting her to coffee. She showed up precisely on time, ordered black coffee, and listened while I laid out Fortify's numbers with brutal honesty. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You've got the bones of a real company, but you're building it on sand. Fix the cash flow and you'll have a foundation. Without it, you'll be in a permanent scramble." Her plan was straightforward but surgical. Renegotiate payment terms with existing clients to shorten the cycle, introduce early payment incentives, and implement a rolling forecast to anticipate shortfalls before they hit. She also suggested a modest credit line, not to rely on, but to use strategically when contract timing didn't align with expenses. "Your problem isn't that you don't have enough business," she said. "It's that your money shows up too late to matter." By the end of that meeting, I knew I wanted her on our side. I offered her a part-time role as Fortify's CFO, with the understanding that if things improved, we'd expand her hours. She agreed, but with one condition. "If I take this on, I'm not here to babysit. I'm here to scale." That was the beginning of a partnership that would change everything. Within 3 months, our average receivable turnaround dropped by 40%. We had enough cash on hand to hire an additional paralegal and invest in better contract automation software. The stress that had clung to every invoice started to lift. More importantly, Evelyn had a way of making the numbers feel less like a battlefield and more like a blueprint. She gave us room to breathe, and in that space, Fortify began to grow, not just survive. What I didn't realize then was that her precision and timing would one day be the deciding factor in a much larger battle, one that had been quietly building since long before we met. It was a Wednesday morning in early spring, the kind where the sun barely clears the horizon before disappearing behind a bank of heavy clouds. I was halfway through a contract review when Evelyn walked into my office holding a thick envelope. Her face was unreadable, which was never a good sign. She set the envelope on my desk. "You're going to want to sit for this." Inside was a formal complaint, 32 pages of dense legal language, from a competitor we'd barely spoken to in the past. They were accusing Fortify Legal Tech of stealing their proprietary algorithm, claiming our contract automation platform was a derivative work built on their intellectual property. It was an absurd allegation. Our technology had been built in-house, line by line, over countless nights and weekends. But absurdity doesn't stop a lawsuit from draining a company dry. I skimmed the first few pages and felt a tightening in my chest. They'd filed in a jurisdiction notorious for favoring plaintiffs in tech disputes. The damages they were claiming could easily wipe us out, but worse, the injunction they were requesting could freeze our operations entirely while the case played out. "How long can we hold if this goes to court?" I asked. Evelyn didn't need to check the numbers. 5 weeks, maybe 6 if we freeze all non-essential spending. That's payroll, rent, everything. 5 weeks. The words felt like a countdown, already ticking in my ears. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I'd been in law long enough to know this wasn't about truth. It was about pressure. They wanted to force us into an expensive defense we couldn't afford, to cripple us before we had a chance to grow into real competition. By noon, I had the leadership team in the conference room. The air was thick with tension as I laid out the facts. "We did not take their code," I said, "but they're betting we can't afford to prove it. They're wrong." Evelyn tapped a folder on the table. "We've kept meticulous development records, time-stamped commits, archived drafts, even the original whiteboard diagrams. They're in what you'd call a legal war chest." She glanced at me knowingly. She understood where I'd learned the value of keeping everything. Still, preparation was one thing. Surviving the next few weeks was another. Every client who heard about the lawsuit might hesitate to sign or renew contracts. The mere shadow of uncertainty could kill momentum we'd fought years to build. We decided on a two-pronged strategy: mount an aggressive legal defense while keeping our client work spotless and on time. If we could show both the court and our customers that we weren't faltering, we stood a chance. The next days blurred into a relentless cycle. Mornings in client meetings, afternoons with our legal team, nights sifting through every scrap of documentation from Fortify's inception. I pulled code commit histories from old backups, pored over design drafts, and even dug up the original pitch deck I'd made for Harper, complete with dated technical diagrams. One evening, while reviewing an old project log, I found a photo I'd taken of our first whiteboard session. Markers smudged, handwriting crooked, but the logic flow unmistakable. It was dated months before the competitor had even announced their algorithm. I sent it to our attorneys immediately. That photo became Exhibit A. Meanwhile, Evelyn worked the financial angle, renegotiating payment schedules to accelerate cash inflow. She called in favors with trusted clients, framing it as a chance to help Fortify weather a baseless challenge. Many responded by paying early, some even overpaying with the promise we'd settle up later. It wasn't charity, it was trust we'd earned. The competitor underestimated one crucial thing. I wasn't just a lawyer who'd started a tech company. I was someone who'd been cornered before, someone who knew how to survive on less than nothing. Every late night I'd spent archiving records, every redundant backup I'd kept, every clause I'd insisted on in our contracts. It was all paying off now. 2 weeks in, we filed our response with evidence so detailed and irrefutable that the judge denied the preliminary injunction outright. It didn't end the case, but it meant we could keep operating while we fought. The look on the opposing counsel's face when the ruling came down was its own small victory. When we got back to the office, my team was waiting. They'd been quiet all morning, but as soon as I stepped inside, someone started clapping. Then everyone joined in. It wasn't the end of the fight, but it was proof we weren't going to be steamrolled. I met Evelyn's eyes across the room. She gave the smallest nod, the kind that says, "We're not done, but we're not dead." What none of them knew yet was that this battle was just the first crack in a much larger wall, one that, when it fell, would change everything for me and for Fortify. The morning after the injunction was denied, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator. The numbers didn't lie. Even with early payments from clients and Evelyn's airtight budgeting, we were still staring down months of legal fees that could hollow out Fortify's reserves. If we lost our footing now, we might survive the lawsuit but emerge too weak to recover. I looked out the window at the curb, where my car was parked, a deep blue sedan I'd bought after my first promotion at the law firm. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. I'd paid for it in cash, a quiet symbol that I could stand on my own. Selling it felt like stripping away one of the few personal victories I'd allowed myself, but Harper's voice echoed in my head from a late-night phone call 2 days earlier. "This isn't just a lawsuit, Fiona. It's a measure of your readiness. You think you're building a company. I think you're being tested to see if you can defend one." That morning, I made the call. By noon, I had a buyer, another attorney who'd been eyeing the car for months. We met in the parking lot of my apartment building. The transaction was brisk. When she handed me the cashier's check, my fingers hesitated for a beat before I took it. I forced myself not to look back as she drove away. The money went straight into a dedicated legal defense account, not a general fund, not payroll, defense only. With that decision made, I started interviewing law firms. Most of the big names came with equally big price tags, and their approach was cautious, almost formulaic. They saw our case as something to be settled quickly, not fought on principle. That didn't sit well with me. I wasn't looking for a quiet exit. I wanted a victory that left no doubt about our integrity. Then Harper connected me with a trio of younger attorneys she'd mentored years ago, sharp, aggressive, and hungry for a win that would cement their reputation. They'd cut their teeth on high-stakes commercial disputes and had a reputation for creative strategies that rattled opponents off script. When they walked into the Fortify office for the first time, I could tell they weren't here to posture. They carried slim case files, not glossy pitch decks. One of them, a litigator named Mason, opened with, "We've read the complaint. It's sloppy. That's our opening." They outlined a strategy that was both surgical and risky, not just disproving the allegations, but counterclaiming for damages under tortious interference, arguing that the lawsuit itself was a calculated attempt to disrupt our contracts and client relationships. It was bold. It was also exactly the kind of move that could flip the pressure back onto our opponent. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, but didn't object. She knew I'd made my choice the moment I sold the car. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about sending a message that Fortify wouldn't be intimidated, and neither would I. The first week with the new team felt like stepping into a war room, whiteboards filled with timelines, evidence chains, and possible deposition targets. Mason and his partners moved fast, drafting discovery requests that forced the other side to either produce proof they didn't have or admit the gaps in their claims. In the middle of it all, Harper stopped by one evening. She found me at my desk, surrounded by files, still in the same suit I'd worn to court that morning. She leaned against the doorway. "When I told you to keep records, this is what I meant. This is why you don't wait for a fight to get ready." I smiled faintly. Feels like I've been getting ready for this my whole life. She stepped inside, her expression softening. "You have. But remember, winning isn't just about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself you can stand in the fire and not flinch." I thought about that long after she left. The car was gone, my savings thinner than they'd been in years, and every waking hour was consumed by legal prep. But there was a strange clarity in it, too. The noise had fallen away. There was only the fight and the conviction that it was worth every sacrifice. By the end of the month, our counterclaim was filed, the media had picked up the story, and the narrative was shifting. We weren't the embattled startup anymore. We were the company standing up to a bully. Clients began reaching out, not to cancel contracts, but to express support. One even said, "If you can take on a giant and not blink, I know you can handle my business." For the first time since the envelope landed on my desk, I felt the balance tilt ever so slightly in our favor. The war was far from over, but the ground under my feet felt solid again. And deep down, I knew Harper was right. This wasn't just a case. It was the proof I'd been waiting for. The verdict came down on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind of weather that makes the courthouse steps look like a slick mirror. We had been in the courtroom for weeks, trading motions and arguments like a game of chess played at full speed. When the judge finally read the decision, it took a moment for the words to register. "Plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice." I gripped the edge of the counsel table, the sound of the gavel echoing in my ears. Mason allowed himself a quiet exhale, while Harper's mouth curved into a rare, satisfied smile from the back row. The counterclaim wouldn't go to trial. The other side had agreed to a confidential settlement just hours earlier, but the dismissal was public, final, and absolute. We didn't just win, we crushed the allegation so completely that it couldn't be resurrected. Outside, the courthouse plaza buzzed with reporters. Word had leaked ahead of the formal ruling, and by the time I stepped into the drizzle, microphones and cameras were already pointed my way. I wasn't in the mood for sound bites, but I knew this was part of the war. So I said what needed to be said. Calm, measured, unshaken. Fortify Legal Tech will always defend the integrity of our work and the trust of our clients. Today is a win for both. By evening, headlines were everywhere. Fortify Legal Tech defeats IP suit in courtroom upset. The survivor startup that fought back. CNBC called us the Survivor, a moniker that stuck far longer than I expected. Harper joked that it sounded like the title of a made-for-TV movie. I didn't mind. Survival had always been the first step toward victory. The immediate aftermath felt surreal. Clients who had been cautious during the lawsuit now signed multi-year contracts without hesitation. Referral calls came in daily, some from companies far larger than we had ever dreamed of serving. Within 3 months, our revenue had doubled. It wasn't just money, it was credibility, the kind that can't be bought or faked. Investors who once ignored my emails were now requesting meetings. They spoke of market confidence and brand resilience, phrases that sounded sterile compared to the gritty reality of how we'd earned them. Evelyn handled the influx with surgical precision. She expanded our client onboarding team, restructured billing cycles to sustain cash flow, and quietly began tracking the kind of growth, metrics that attract the next tier of backers. One evening, she appeared in my office with a spreadsheet and that particular gleam in her eye. "We should start thinking about an IPO," she said, as if she were suggesting we order lunch. I laughed at first, thinking she was being theoretical, but Evelyn didn't joke about numbers. "Look at the trajectory. Post-victory, we're not just stable, we're scaling. If we plan now, we could be in position within 2 years. Less if we keep this momentum." The idea landed in my chest like a weight and a spark at the same time. Going public had never been part of my immediate plan. Survival had always felt like the more urgent goal, but now survival was a given. The thought of Fortify standing on that kind of stage, not as a scrappy unknown, but as a force in the industry, sent a rush through me I hadn't felt since the day we signed our very first client. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, and the city outside my window glowed in patches of streetlight. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who had to account for every dollar, who learned early to document everything because trust was a currency she couldn't afford. That girl had built Fortify piece by piece and fought to protect it when it was most vulnerable. Now, the question wasn't whether we could survive another attack. It was whether we were ready to step into a new arena entirely, one where the stakes were higher, the scrutiny sharper, and the victories visible to the world. I glanced at the legal pad on my nightstand, where I'd scrawled Evelyn's words. We should start thinking about an IPO. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was the first note in a new score, and I could already hear the music building. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, in the middle of a meeting with Evelyn about potential underwriters. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the name Fiona Carlisle flashing across my screen had a gravity I couldn't ignore. I excused myself, stepped into the quiet of the hallway, and answered. Her voice was cool, almost clinical. "I thought you should know," she began. "I've updated my will. Everything, house, accounts, investments, will go to Daniel. It just makes sense. You've built your own life now, so you can manage on your own." I leaned against the wall, the hum of the office fading. "So you're cutting me out entirely?" There was a pause, the kind that's more statement than silence. "You don't need it," she said. "Daniel has a family to provide for. You have your work." In the background, I could hear the faint rattle of dishes, like she was washing something as she dismantled any last illusion of fairness. She didn't sound angry or regretful, just, settled. "Fine," I said evenly. "Thank you for being clear." I hung up before she could reply, my thumb pressing the red button with the same precision I'd used to sign a contract. For a moment, I just stood there, phone in hand, feeling the echo of her words settle into place. Not as a wound this time, but as confirmation. Back in the conference room, Evelyn was still at the table, her notes spread neatly before her. She glanced up, reading my face without a word. I slipped my phone into my bag and sat down. "We were talking about underwriters," I said. She didn't push. She knew that if I wanted to share, I would. But I could see in her eyes that she understood. Something had shifted. That evening, I typed out the message I hadn't sent in years. "Thank you for making things clear." I hit send and put the phone face down. The pause that followed was deliberate. I didn't wait for a reply. Didn't check to see if she'd read it. It wasn't a conversation. It was a closing statement. Later that night, I found myself thinking about the last time she'd drawn a line like this. I'd been 19, home from my first semester at college, when she told me she wouldn't be co-signing for my apartment the following year. "It's time you learn to manage on your own," she'd said then too. That decision had led to 3 jobs and the smallest studio I could afford, but it had also taught me exactly how much I could endure. This was no different, except that now I had the means to stand without even the pretense of support. And that was the irony she would never acknowledge. In trying to remind me of my place, she'd only confirmed how far I'd come from it. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at my desk, letting the city's evening light stretch across the floor. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably hearing the same news in a very different tone. I wondered if he understood the real cost of inheriting everything from her. The phone stayed quiet. No reply. No apology. Just the same silence I'd grown up with. Cold, deliberate, final. I turned it over, screen down again, and let it be. This wasn't the kind of loss that would slow me anymore. If anything, it was fuel. The kind Harper had once told me to save for the right moment, and I had a feeling that moment was getting closer. Harper had a way of making introductions feel less like meetings and more like inevitabilities. One Friday afternoon, she asked me to join her in a small cafe near the courthouse. Neutral ground, she called it. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table with a girl who couldn't have been more than 18. "This is Lena," Harper said, her tone carrying the kind of weight that meant pay attention. Lena's handshake was tentative, her eyes darting between Harper and me as if measuring the cost of trust. She wore a plain sweatshirt, sleeves pulled over her hands, and her backpack looked heavier than she did. "She wants to study law," Harper continued, "but her father's made it clear he won't pay for it. Says it's not a profession for women who want families." The words landed with a sting I knew too well. Not the exact phrasing, but the sentiment. Doors closed before you could even reach for the handle. I asked Lena what she wanted. Not what her father wanted, not what she'd been told to want, but her. "I want to help people who don't even know they're being taken advantage of," she said quietly, almost apologetically. I've seen it happen to my mom's friends. Bad contracts, unfair terms, and no one fights it because they think it's too expensive or too complicated. The conviction in her voice was unmistakable. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. I remembered being that age, holding truths so fiercely inside because speaking them too loudly made you a target. Over coffee, Harper filled in the details. Lena's father controlled every dollar in the household, from her mother's grocery money to Lena's allowance. When Lena applied for scholarships, he intercepted the letters. The only reason she'd gotten this far was because Harper had once represented a tenant in a building her father owned, and the tenant had been Lena's aunt. The connection had stuck. I listened, nodding slowly, my mind pulling threads from my own past, the intercepted opportunities, the way financial control could shrink your world until you believed the walls were natural. When Harper stepped away to take a call, Lena leaned forward. "Do you think it's worth it?" she asked. "Fighting to get in, even if everyone tells you not to?" I thought of every closed door, every dismissal wrapped in polite language, every time I'd been told to be realistic. I thought of the folder in my desk labeled reserves, full of documents I'd saved for the day they might matter. "Yes," I said, "but you don't have to fight the way they expect you to. Sometimes the best move is to build your case quietly, piece by piece, until the day they can't ignore you anymore." Her eyes widened, like I'd handed her a map she didn't know existed. Before we left, I slipped her my card. "If you ever need advice, or just someone who knows what it's like, call me." It wasn't a promise I made lightly, but there was something about the way she looked at me, equal parts hope and wariness, that made me certain she'd use it. Walking back to my office, I felt an odd mix of heaviness and resolve. Lena wasn't me, not exactly, but she was close enough to stir something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of responsibility that went beyond my own battles. Harper must have known that. Later that night, I found myself thinking about her question, whether it was worth it. And I realized that the answer wasn't just yes for me. It was yes for anyone willing to see the fight through, even if they had to start in the shadows. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my desk, and opened a new folder on my computer. I titled it Torch. Inside, I started a list. Resources. Contacts, scholarship programs I knew weren't widely advertised. It wasn't much yet, but it was a start. Harper once told me that the real measure of winning wasn't just what you gained, but what you passed on. Looking at Lena, I understood that in a way I never had before. Some fights aren't just yours to win, they're yours to keep alive for the next person. And maybe, just maybe, Lena would be the one to carry it further than I ever could. By late spring, my calendar had become a battlefield of priorities. On one side was the IPO, the culmination of years of building Fortify legal tech from a cramped office with secondhand furniture into a company the market was starting to whisper about. On the other was my master's graduation in law, a pursuit I'd tucked away years ago when survival had taken precedence over ambition. The dates collided. Same day. Same morning, actually. The logistics alone made Evelyn shake her head when she saw my schedule taped to the wall of my office. "You realize this isn't just a conflict," she said, stepping closer to study it. "It's a statement. That day is going to define you in two worlds, the one that doubted you and the one that watched you climb." Her words hung in the air, more prophecy than observation. We sat at the long table in our conference room, surrounded by stacks of reports, term sheets, and mock press releases. The IPO preparations were a symphony of moving parts: legal compliance, investor briefings, media strategy. Each decision was another tile in a mosaic that had to be perfect. Evelyn, with her calm precision, kept the pace steady. "Market timing is in our favor," she said. "But if we miss our window, we'll be fighting headwinds for months." I knew she was right. The numbers were strong, the demand was there, and the team was running at full tilt. But the thought of missing my graduation tugged at me in a different way. It wasn't about the ceremony, it was about closing a chapter I'd started under entirely different circumstances. Back then, I'd been the girl who kept her tuition receipts in a locked drawer, terrified they'd disappear. Now I had the freedom to walk across that stage without wondering who might be holding the purse strings. That evening, I called Harper. She listened as I laid out the impossible overlap. "Then make it yours," she said simply. "Don't pick one over the other. Let them see both. There's power in that." The idea stayed with me. In the weeks that followed, my days became split shifts between the IPO war room and the quiet focus of my graduation preparations. Mornings often started with investor calls, walking them through revenue projections, legal safeguards, and the proprietary algorithm that had drawn so much attention. Afternoons were for final papers and oral exam rehearsals. Somewhere in the middle, I still made time to answer Lena's questions about contract law. She was weeks away, from starting community college, still working evenings at a diner. One night, after she'd finished telling me about an unfair tip-sharing policy at work, she asked, "Do you ever feel like the day you've been waiting for your whole life is coming, but you don't know which one it is?" I smiled because I knew exactly what she meant. Evelyn and I met with the media team a week before the big day. They wanted quotes ready in case the IPO numbers broke records. Evelyn leaned forward, hands clasped. "Remember, Fiona, whatever happens, your graduation isn't just a personal milestone. It's part of the story. It says something about your priorities, your resilience. It's your declaration that you're not defined by what was withheld from you. That night, I laid both outfits out on my couch, the tailored navy suit for the IPO meetings, and the black graduation gown with its crimson hood. The contrast made me laugh. Two versions of me standing side by side, both hard-earned, both necessary. I didn't know exactly how the day would play out, only that it would. Every choice I'd made up to this point had been about refusing to be cornered into a single path. Now, I was going to walk two at once. When I finally turned off the lights and headed to bed, Evelyn's words came back to me, quiet but steady. That day will be your declaration. And she was right. It wasn't about choosing between the worlds I'd fought to enter. It was about showing that I belonged in both, and that neither could take that from me again. The morning air was still, as if the world had pressed pause. I woke before my alarm, lying there in the half-light, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My graduation gown hung from the closet door, its black fabric catching the soft glow of the early sun. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the cool, slightly rough weave. The sound it made, like the rustle of turning pages, was oddly comforting. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee drifted up before the first sip. I let it linger on my tongue, the bitter edge grounding me in the moment. Today was too big for rush. The IPO meetings were already set in motion. Evelyn had arranged everything so that I could focus on the ceremony until the precise moment my presence was needed. Halfway through my first cup, my phone buzzed. Evelyn's message was short, efficient, almost cryptic. Keep your phone on you at all times. No greeting, no signature. I smirked. That was her way of saying something important was brewing. I moved through my apartment with deliberate slowness, pressing each crease out of my graduation hood, checking my notes for the brief speech I might have to give if the dean asked. I clipped my hair back, leaving just enough loose strands to soften the frame of my face. Every action felt ritualistic, as if I were layering armor one piece at a time. By the time I locked the door behind me, the city had started to stir. Distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere down the block. I slid into the back seat of the car, waiting outside. My driver glanced in the rearview mirror, gave a small nod, and pulled into the street. The gown pooled around my lap, its folds warm from the morning sun. The campus came into view, sprawling and green under the cloudless sky. Students in gowns milled about, laughter and camera shutters filling the air. I stepped out, the weight of the day settling into my chest. Not heavy, just present. I didn't know then that before this morning was over, the world would see me in a way my family never had. We gathered in a line near the back of the auditorium, the murmur of the crowd swelling and fading like waves. The program booklet in my hands was slightly damp. My palms betrayed the calm face I wore. The first vibration came from my phone just as the procession music began. I slid it out, half expecting a logistical note from Evelyn. Instead, a single line glared up at me. Don't expect support. You're on your own. It was from my mother. The words were not new. Variations of them had followed me since my teens. But the timing was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Almost. I locked the screen, sliding the phone back into my pocket, letting the heat of that message burn quietly in my palm. Before the sting could fully settle, the phone buzzed again. I hesitated, then checked. Evelyn this time. No preamble, no soft let-in. We just crossed $2.5 billion. CNBC and Bloomberg are calling nonstop. Where are you? I stared at the screen. The two messages stacked in the same conversation list, worlds apart yet arriving within moments of each other. My lips pressed into a thin line, not to hide a smile, but to contain it. This was the collision point. Years of work, countless hours, and all the buried moments of being told I wasn't enough converging into one instant. Around me, the line shuffled forward. The dean's voice was echoing names across the auditorium. My name was coming soon. I slid the phone away, pulse steadying. The irony was too precise, too cleanly cut to be anything but fate playing its hand. I stepped forward when the usher nodded, the hem of my gown brushing the carpeted steps. Somewhere in the front rows, I knew she was there. Watching, judging, perhaps, still holding that last message she sent like it was the final word. She didn't know yet. The stage lights washed over me as I reached the podium, a warm glare that blurred the edges of the crowd. The applause was polite, steady, but my eyes went immediately to the third row, center aisle. She was exactly where I thought she'd be. Her posture was flawless, chin lifted just enough to signal she was here out of obligation, not pride. But then I saw the slight tilt of her head, the narrowing of her eyes. Someone beside her, a family friend maybe, leaned in and passed their phone. She took it without hesitation, glancing down once, twice, then pausing. Even from the stage, I could see the change. It wasn't dramatic. No dropped jaw or gasp, but it was there in the way her mouth froze mid-press, in how her fingers tightened around the phone. She was reading about the IPO. She was reading about me. The dean's voice said my name, my degree. I took the diploma with a nod, the weight of it unfamiliar in my hands. But my focus stayed on her, watching as the news settled in, as she realized the daughter she'd dismissed this very morning was now on every financial headline worth reading. The sound of applause swelled. Cameras flashed. I turned slightly toward them, letting the moment play out, but my peripheral vision kept her in frame. She was still holding the phone, still looking, but now there was something else there, an unguarded flicker, quickly masked. I stepped off the stage into a tide of graduates, the rustle of gowns and the scent of fresh flowers surrounding me. Behind me, the dean called the next name, but I knew this moment would stretch far beyond these walls. In her mind, it would replay, maybe for years, the second her narrative about me cracked and light poured through, and I carried that with me, not as vengeance, but as quiet proof. Some victories don't need to be spoken aloud, they just need to be seen. The restaurant was one of those quiet, linen tablecloth places my mother favored for family occasions, though the air at our table was anything but celebratory. The scent of roasted rosemary chicken floated between us, but no one was touching their plates. My diploma sat in its leather case beside me, still sealed. Daniel sat across, tapping his fork against the edge of his plate, in a nervous rhythm. His usual confidence, the kind that came from years of being the favored child, was noticeably absent. He tried a half smile when our eyes met, but it didn't hold. My mother was to my right, posture perfect, eyes fixed on the bread basket as if it might say something worth hearing. She hadn't spoken since we sat down. Not about the ceremony, not about the news she had undoubtedly read in full by now. Silence had always been her sharpest weapon, and today she wielded it like a blade. Halfway through the first course, my phone lit up against the white linen. I let it vibrate twice before answering. It was my attorney, voice crisp and deliberate. "Fiona, the file is ready. All the supporting documents are in place. We can send them whenever you give the word." I glanced at the two faces beside me, Daniel's fidgeting, my mother's unmoved, and felt the air thicken. "Understood," I said, keeping my tone flat. "I'll confirm soon." When I set the phone down, Daniel's eyes darted to it, then to me, like he was trying to solve a puzzle without the edges. My mother didn't look up at all. The server cleared plates we hadn't touched. The clink of cutlery on porcelain was the loudest thing in the room. That night, the city was hushed under a thin drizzle, streetlights haloed in mist. I sat at my desk, the prepared letter open on my laptop screen. The language was precise, the kind that leaves no room for misunderstanding. Repayment demand, itemized debt, deadlines, legal consequences. Years of careful record-keeping condensed into a document that could not be refuted. My finger hovered over the trackpad, ready to send, but something in my chest tightened. This was the moment between thought and action, where decisions turn into consequences. I thought of the nights I counted coins in my dorm to afford groceries, the humiliation of being told to learn self-reliance, while my name was used to secure six-figure loans I never saw a cent from. Still, there was a whisper. What if sending this only hardened the wall between us forever? Was it worth the fracture? I called Harper. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but steady. I told her everything, the file, the hesitation, the part of me that still wanted to believe blood meant something. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Fiona, forgiveness is a choice, but letting them continue is consent. You have to decide whether you're ending the harm or just living with it." The truth of it settled like a weight on my shoulders. I wasn't seeking revenge for the sake of it. I was ending a cycle. I closed the file, not to walk away, but to give myself until morning. Sometimes the line between anger and clarity is just a night's rest. The next morning, I hit send. There was no ceremony to it. Just a quiet click, and the letter was gone, a stone dropped into water. 2 days later, I got the call from my attorney. "They've agreed to settle in full," she said. "Funds will be transferred this week." No counter-arguments, no negotiation, and notably, no apology. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, there was a strange calm, like I'd closed a door that had been left ajar for years. The settlement wasn't about the money, it was about the proof that they couldn't take without consequence anymore. That evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Daniel. "You did what I should have done a long time ago." I stared at the screen, rereading it. For the first time in years, I believed he meant it. Whether it was guilt, admiration, or simply relief that the confrontation was over, I couldn't tell. But it was the closest thing to acknowledgement I'd ever gotten from him. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because some things are better left as quiet truths. They had paid the price, and I had reclaimed what was mine. Not just in dollars, but in the unshakable certainty that I no longer owed them silence. The announcement took place in a modest community hall, not a grand ballroom. I wanted it that way. This wasn't about flashing wealth. It was about putting something into the world that couldn't be taken away. The banner behind me read, "The Harper Vale Fund. For women who dare to begin." I told the gathered reporters and local leaders how the fund would provide full scholarships and mentorship to young women shut out from pursuing law because of family or financial control. Then I introduced the first recipient, Lena. She walked onto the stage wearing the same determination in her eyes I'd seen the day Harper brought her to my office. Her hands shook when I handed her the letter confirming her acceptance. The crowd applauded, but she didn't let go of my hand. Instead, she leaned in and hugged me so tightly it stole my breath. "You didn't just give me an opportunity," she whispered. "You opened my whole future." For a moment, I felt the weight of every locked door I'd faced in my own youth, and how different things might have been if someone had stood there with a key. I thought of Harper, sitting in the front row, her eyes glistening as she watched the exchange. The emotional echo of our shared history, two women who had clawed their way back from the edges, made the moment ache in the best way. Lena stepped back, her smile steady now, and I knew this wasn't charity. This was a seed, one that would grow far beyond my reach. That night, the office was quiet. I unlocked the small safe in the corner, the metal cool under my fingertips. Inside were 2 items I had kept deliberately apart until now. The first was a graduation card, edges worn from years of being opened and closed. Inside, in my mother's neat, restrained handwriting, was the sentence she'd sent as a text years later. "You're on your own. No signature, no warmth." The second was the framed front page from the day of the IPO. Headlines in bold type announced Fortify Legal Tech's $2.5 billion debut. Evelyn had sent it over as a surprise gift, knowing I would never buy something like that for myself. I placed the card beside the framed article, aligning the edges. The contrast was sharp, one a dismissal, the other a declaration. I closed the safe without locking it, as if to remind myself I didn't need to guard these anymore. They weren't wounds. They were markers. Standing by the window, I spoke the words aloud, letting them settle into the air. There are victories that don't need the applause of those who once turned away. The city below moved at its usual rhythm, unaware of my private ceremony. But inside me, something unlatched. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about living without the weight of proving anything at all. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my office floor, cutting gold lines between the shadows of the blinds. I stood by the window, coffee warm in my hands, breathing in the stillness before the day began. My heartbeat was steady now. No rush of adrenaline, no undercurrent of dread, just the quiet knowledge that I had crossed a finish line no one else could see. But even as I exhaled, my eyes were drawn forward, toward the skyline, as if there were still more ground to cover. Behind me, the door opened softly. Lena stepped in, already balancing a stack of law books against her hip. She had that same energy I once carried into Harper's office, nervous, hungry, determined. Harper followed a moment later, her knowing smile framed by the morning light. It struck me then how the threads had woven together. The girl I'd once been, the mentor who had saved me from breaking, and now the young woman ready to carry it all forward. The cycle wasn't closing, it was expanding. We talked briefly about Lena's first semester schedule, her internship options, the legal clinic she wanted to volunteer at. The air between us was light but grounded, rooted in the certainty that beginnings can happen at any point in a life. I glanced back toward the window, the city alive with possibility. The camera in my mind pulled back slowly, fading not on an ending but on a horizon. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.